It's a Tuesday night in July, and Bridgeport's Italian Club is getting a little rowdy. Upstairs, some guys are sitting at the bar, but downstairs, around 100 people are packed in shoulder to shoulder. Some are shouting. Believe it or not, this is a political party meeting.
Keep quiet, otherwise I have to remove from this place.
The guy trying to quiet things down, that's Mario Testa, the so-called kingmaker of Bridgeport politics. His formal title is chairman of the Democratic Town Committee, or DTC. That's just a fancy way of saying he wields a lot of power in the city. When you ask people about Bridgeport politics, his name comes up again and again.
Thank you, Town Committee members.
People who know him say Testa is skilled at rallying party members to fall in line. Some describe him like he's an old-school party boss. Like he's hanging out in a smoke-filled room calling the shots. And so I'd imagined him as this large, cigar-chewing kind of guy. But in real life, he's polite, buttoned up, grandfatherly.
Now, the first item on the agenda
Testa does a lot in his role as DTC chairman.
will be the nomination for the mayor of the city of Bridgeport.
Tonight, he's starting the nomination process for the next mayor.
I will entertain a motion for the nomination.
But he's having a tough time getting the crowd to settle down.
Listen! Let's keep quiet.
You gotta go!
Dispersed among the people booing and cheering are roughly 90 members of the Democratic Town Committee. They're influential in shaping city government. Part of that is by endorsing candidates.
Fellow Democrats, I'm here tonight to nominate a person I've known for quite some time.
Candidates backed by the party have a big advantage. Why? Well, let's be honest. People don't always know who's running for office. Some just vote by party affiliation. And in Bridgeport, Democrats outnumber Republicans about 9-1. So being the Democratic nominee goes a long way. Critics say it's challenging to succeed in politics in Bridgeport without the support of people in this room. The turnout on this night is also kind of impressive, because a lot of people already know what's going to happen in the race for mayor. They're going to endorse the incumbent, Joe Ganim.
Yeah, I think he's going to get that endorsement tonight.
That's Reverend Glenn Petway. He's on the committee.
I believe that he's got the support of many members in our district and many members in other districts.
Mayor Joe Ganim was convicted on corruption charges, but voters put him back in office after he got out of prison.
Today, Ganim has a lot of allies in this room, including Mario Testa.
That is why I am proud to say Joe Ganim for 4 more years. And I hope that we can say Joe Ganim for 4 more years.
So who are all those people booing? A lot of them support John Gomes. He's also running for mayor. His people are really making a racket.
Sir, enough is enough. Are there any further seconds? There now. Are there any other further nominations? They're done. The secretary will cast one vote for Joe Ganim. Thank you.
But sure enough, Ganim gets the nomination.
All in favor?
Ganim accepts, kind of strutting around and shouting into the mic. The crowd goes nuts.
It's important that we pause for a moment. Think about the importance of this process, about this great Democratic Party in the largest city in the state of Connecticut. Our duty, our obligation, and our commitment to the people of the city of Bridgeport for a better community.
From Connecticut Public, I'm Kate Saltzer.
And I'm Bria Lloyd.
This is In Absentia, a podcast about political dysfunction in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
The systems that enable it.
And what this all means for the residents who wonder if their vote even matters.
Last episode, we told you about Joe Ganim's political comeback. Outsiders wonder, how does he keep winning? One working theory is that in Bridgeport, it's the Democratic political machine.
Machine politics means that a political organization that runs as a machine does, sort of automatically, and churns out victories earned and unearned, time after time.
Historian Terry Galway says it's this idea of a tightly organized party offering incentives like jobs in exchange for political loyalty. But in Bridgeport, people connected to the party have also been accused of bending the rules.
Absentee ballot battle. Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim needed hundreds of absentee ballots to swing the Democratic primary in his favor, and now the state is stepping in to investigate allegations of voter fraud.
And some are even calling for a new election.
Machine politics has a rich and controversial history in the U.S. People tend to think of it as a product of a bygone era. But in Bridgeport today, critics say it's thriving and that it enables a form of political dysfunction that holds the city back.
In this episode, I'll walk us through how the political machine works in the Park City. And we look at the city's kingmaker, Mario Testa. Mayor Joe Ganim and Mario Testa go way back. To understand how that relationship affects Bridgeport, you need to understand the history of machine politics. If it's been a minute since you were in a high school U.S. history class, here's a little Machine Politics 101. A political machine is a party organization that works to get voter loyalty and turnout through incentives like government jobs. Political machines usually have a ton of control over how members act. And the criticism is that they're not transparent or an ethical form of governance.
Machine politics suggests almost that there's no choice.
That's Terry Galway, the historian. He's an expert on what you might call the golden age of machine politics in America, a time in the late 19th and early 20th centuries when party bosses ran the city of New York.
The machine decides who the candidate is going to be in a process that is opaque. That candidate is presented to the voters almost as a fait accompli.
Galway wrote a whole book on this subject, and what he found is that political machines throughout American history have some common features.
The reason they exist often is because that municipality or that county is so one-sided in its registration. So where you see machines exist are where in urban areas that are predominantly Democrat, in suburban areas that are primarily Republican, and the opposition basically serves as a joke.
That idea of one party dominating politics is certainly true in Bridgeport, where Democrats run things. One-party rule exists in a lot of places, both Republican and Democrat, but not all of those places have political machines.
That's the breeding ground for a political machine. That's where you get a position where the party is basically the ultimate arbiter of who gets elected.
Galway writes about the most infamous political machine in the U.S., New York City's Tammany Hall. That was this notorious machine operating from the late 18th to mid-20th century. It targeted and attracted support from immigrant communities and doled out jobs in exchange for political favors and loyalty.
The machine was able to function because it had this network of district leaders and block captains. If a good machine had its eyes and ears on every block of a city.
And people say Testa has ears on every block in Bridgeport. People in every neighborhood moving the party's agenda forward and helping Testa maintain his winning streak. Here he is at Ganim's watch party in the mayoral primary last year.
And by the way, since I've been the town chairman
you haven't lost once.
And the mayor, we came up together. I came up as a chairman, he came up as a mayor.
You run Bridgeport!
And we haven't lost one election.
Did you catch that? Someone in the crowd yelled,
You run Bridgeport!
"You run Bridgeport." We never got Testa to sit down for an interview, but we ran into him at some local events, so you'll hear some of that sound throughout this episode. It wasn't always this way in Bridgeport. For one, there used to be greater political diversity in the city. Bridgeport even had a socialist mayor in the first half of the 20th century. But it's been pretty solidly Democratic since 1975. And the DTC itself hasn't always been a powerful force.
And nobody listened to anyone. There was no unity.
Democrat Tom Busey was mayor in the 1980s. He says there was infighting in the party when he served in office.
So when I ran for mayor, there was a candidate out of the North End. There was a candidate out of the West End.
He got primaried as the mayor because the DTC couldn't coalesce around him. But he saw that change under Ganim.
The Democratic Town Committee became a force after Mayor Ganim won the election, because I think Ganim didn't want to be bothered. That was probably the right mindset. Didn't want to be bothered with the political side of it. And so he turned that over to a town chairman.
To understand Bridgeport and its politics, you gotta understand Testa. He's a pretty private guy, but we know he's been involved in Bridgeport politics for more than 40 years. Busey says Testa came to Bridgeport from Italy around 1960.
He came over when he was preteen, and he opened up a grocery store on Lexington Avenue in Bridgeport. He's worked all his life.
Busey is not only the former mayor of Bridgeport, he's also Testa's cousin.
Mario's, with me, he's a loving brother, okay? If I needed anything, I don't go to him, but if I needed any, he'd be there. He was in the hospital, I was there. You know, we're just family, you know, blood thicker than water. We overlook our different politics.
People around Testa, even people who aren't his allies, describe him as a master political strategist.
He's a little guy with a strong fist.
That's Democrat John Fabrizi. He served as mayor of Bridgeport from 2003 to 2007. He took office after Ganim was convicted of corruption charges. He says that Testa is a good friend, a selfless guy who always puts the interest of Bridgeport first. But Fabrizi says Testa's also a cunning tactician.
He is brilliant at politics. He knows how to strategize. He knows how to play you, if I can say it that way. And when he supports and backs you, he gives it his all. He does not like to lose.
Chris Caruso has long been critical of Chairman Testa. He's a fellow Democrat and former state representative from Bridgeport. During one of his campaigns, Caruso hung a banner that read, "We're Democrats, not Testocrats."
But I can watch him from a distance, and he's a good strategist. What he has done successfully, frankly, he's divided the community enough to keep those in power he wants in power. He's been strategically smart in dividing people up through jobs, through commissions, through favors, things of that sort. So you keep everyone fighting, and then you're able to advance your candidate.
And there's another dimension to all of this that's crucial to understand. Political machines don't just exist to get somebody elected. They also deliver benefits for their members. Benefits like steady jobs. Historian Terry Galway says it's a phenomenon dating back hundreds of years.
If your job can be described as a patronage job, that's generally not considered a good thing, regardless of your qualifications.
Galway says patronage positions get a bad rap because the impression is people aren't in them for the right reasons.
That sort of has a negative connotation. You got your job because you knew somebody or because you did somebody a favor. Your job is a reward. And in the minds of many people, it probably means that you're not doing very much. And what you are doing is not for the benefit of the taxpayers or the voters, but for the benefit of your political boss.
These days, there are fewer jobs for mayors and party bosses to hand out. Political reformers realized that it was important to have qualified people working in government jobs. Think of things like the fire department and the police department, life and death stuff. But in a city like Bridgeport, some workers still serve at the pleasure of the mayor. Here's former Mayor Tom Busey.
People come to the town chairman and say, I need a job. What do you have? Is there anything open for me? And you're not talking about high-powered jobs. You're not talking about, directors of public works, or you're talking about maintenance workers, custodians, people who are just working out a livelihood, and so they're loyal to that town chairman.
None of that is illegal, by the way, but critics say it's an unsavory part of Bridgeport politics.
This is where Bridgeport is probably dirtiest.
That's Mary Jane Foster, a former Democratic candidate for mayor. She's talking about patronage hiring.
Not only those town committee members, but their significant others or spouses, their nephews, their cousins, their grandmothers. So the tentacles run incredibly wide and deep, with the Democratic Town Committee.
Critics of Testa say he's responsible for perpetuating that kind of old-school patronage system in Bridgeport. I'll find you a job in exchange for your political support. Even supporters say Testa connects people with jobs. Here's John Fabrizi again.
The town chairman has a lot of influence, or should have a lot of influence, with the mayor. So, there are a number of positions in the city, especially in the mayor's office, where you don't necessarily need to advertise and people don't have to compete because it's a mayoral appointed position. So Mario is really good in facilitating getting people jobs.
Bridgeport used to be a thriving industrial center. Factories produced everything from sewing machines to ammunition. For the most part, that's all gone now. And with it, good-paying jobs with benefits. So a steady job can be a big deal. Fabrizi says the chairman of the town committee also facilitates getting people appointed to different commissions.
People like to be appointed to the police commission, the fire commission, the civil service commission, and the list goes on.
There's a few hundred of these positions in the city, and applications go through the mayor's office. They're not paid, but they're prestigious, like the police commission. It establishes department policies and conducts some disciplinary hearings involving officers. And members of the Democratic Town Committee get to decide who gets the party's backing for mayor. When election time rolls around, they hit the ground. Here's Fabrizi with my colleague Jim Huddadine last summer.
Well, the expectation is that you're going to attend fundraisers. The expectation is that you're going to work for the party. You're going to volunteer your time. You're going to volunteer during an election. You're going to try to move the town committee agenda forward. That's your job.
So attending a fundraiser, I take it that's not just showing up and having a cocktail, cocktail.
No, that's writing a check.
Yeah.
So that's expected as well.
Moving the committee agenda forward is one thing, but there's another, more controversial part of all of this. For decades, stories have circulated about a much darker influence driving the outcome of elections in Bridgeport. It's not just the patronage network. It's not just the loyal party members holding campaign signs and turning out for Election Day. There are also allegations of outright fraud. And that fraud has allegedly come in the form of mishandling absentee ballots.
Absentee ballots in Bridgeport are the game.
Mary Jane Foster is talking about a belief we heard repeatedly from people in Bridgeport, that campaigns use absentee ballots to sway elections, that absentee ballots are the game. When we were interviewing people, we heard some of this political lore, stories you can't really say for sure happened, like this one Tom Busey heard from the 70s.
The old-timers at the time, I'm an old-timer myself now, but at the time they would tell a story that one of the party stalwarts had a bag full of absentee ballots that he was ready to, turn in to the town hall. And
just so you know, the guy doesn't actually turn in those ballots. The story ends with the political candidate doing the right thing.
He was just honest.
But Bridgeport does have a documented history of voting irregularities. Back in 2001, a group of local Democrats were forced to resign from the town committee after they got in trouble for breaking the rules on absentee ballots. So to be clear, this isn't an issue that emerged for the first time a few years ago. And we're not talking about the kind of lies that Donald Trump has been telling since he lost the election in 2020. This isn't some massive conspiracy with people hacking voting machines or the ghost of Hugo Chavez flipping votes. But in a city like Bridgeport, election misconduct can be significant, even on a small scale. That's according to Charlie Urso, former lead investigator for the Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission.
With a local primary, it does not take many votes to carry an election. In a statewide, where you have tens of thousands of votes, somebody fooling around with absentee ballots in a place like Bridgeport, well, let's say you controlled that system, it wouldn't necessarily have a bearing on an election.
Voting absentee is allowed under state law if you can't make it to the polls on Election Day, though it's harder to meet the eligibility requirements in Connecticut than in other states. People don't hide the fact that getting absentee ballots into people's hands is part of their strategy in Bridgeport elections. But the rules are strict about who can handle absentee ballots and how they get filed. The campaigns aren't supposed to collect ballots for people or turn them in, and people have been accused of breaking those rules before. One of those controversies came after the Democratic primary in 2019.
An absentee ballot battle. Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim needed hundreds of absentee ballots to swing the Democratic primary in his favor, and now the state is stepping in to investigate allegations of voter fraud.
And some are even calling for a new election.
Ganim faced a challenge that year from State Senator Marilyn Moore, and the race was close. In fact, on election night, it looked like Moore might beat him. Remember, she won the walk-in vote at the polls on Election Day. But Ganim came out on top by about 270 votes, thanks to an edge in absentee ballots. And after the counting was done, a group of Bridgeport residents cried foul.
A lawsuit filed Monday is asking a judge to throw out the results of the Democratic mayoral primary that saw Mayor Joe Ganim eke out a close victory. A victory that wouldn't have happened if not for hundreds of absentee ballots.
3 voters brought the lawsuit, with help from a local organization called Bridgeport Generation Now Votes. It's a grassroots group that wants to reform city government. Here's co-director and president Jamim Davis. She was also Moore's former campaign manager.
We had people who were harassed. There are older people who live in buildings who tell us over and over again that people wait for them when they go pick up their mail to ask, did you get your ballot? Did you get your ballot? Did you get your ballot? And then they take them.
The lawsuit raised a bunch of different concerns, including that political operatives improperly handled absentee ballots during that election in 2019. To make that case, the voters brought testimony from witnesses who said they'd been solicited to vote by absentee ballot, even though they weren't eligible. 6 people also testified that they gave canvassers associated with political campaigns their completed absentee ballots, rather than mailing them in. That's against state law, which is pretty strict about who can return absentee ballots. Ruth Walter was a Bridgeport voter who took the witness stand.
Do you recognize this form?
Yes.
Okay, and is that your signature at the bottom? Yes. Okay, and is that about the date that you remember signing this, August 26th? And is this your handwriting at the top?
No.
It's not your handwriting. Okay. Ma'am, is it possible that someone else entered in that information at the top in section 1?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Different than before you signed it?
I know I didn't sign the top. That's not my handwriting.
Okay.
So I can't tell you how we got it.
Walter testified she first got her own absentee ballot and mailed it in. Later, she said she got a call from a man who didn't identify himself. She said he told her the city didn't get her ballot and somebody would send her a new one. Then she says a guy showed up at her door with a new ballot.
And what happened when he came to your house?
We spoke. I spoke. He gave me the envelope and told me this was the ballot that I needed to fill out again.
Okay, and did you fill it out again?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and was he present when you filled that out?
He stood in the doorway. I went to my kitchen table so I could, do it again. And I put it in all the envelopes and I handed it back.
Okay. And did he
Under state law, only Walter or someone she designates like a caregiver can send in her ballot for her. But instead,
I said goodbye.
And then he walked away with your ballot?
Yeah.
Okay.
What Walter's describing is the kind of tactic that people have been sounding the alarm about in Bridgeport for years now. And not to sound like a broken record, but this is not the kind of voter fraud Trump and his allies fearmonger about. It's not some massive conspiracy. It's much more local and smaller in scale. Things like campaign workers going door to door inside housing complexes where lots of senior citizens live, and then allegedly encouraging people, including some who aren't qualified, to request absentee ballots. Maybe even filling out applications on their behalf and mailing them in. And then when those ballots show up, allegedly telling people who to vote for or watching them vote. Not exactly how the election process was supposed to work, but that's something voters like Walter didn't know.
And at the time that you had that conversation with the person on the phone or with the man who came to your door with the ballot, did you believe that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing?
I never questioned it.
You never questioned it? Okay, thank you. No more questions.
More than 30 people testified during the trial, And after it was all done, it was clear that Superior Court Judge Barry Stevens didn't like some of what he heard. He went out of his way to say the legislature should reconsider allowing people who aren't election officials to handle absentee ballot applications.
In summary, the plaintiffs were successful in identifying very serious election law violations.
But his hands were tied in terms of overturning the election. Stevens ruled that it wasn't possible because the lawsuit didn't come directly from one of the candidates. And the stuff that came up in court didn't meet the criteria spelled out in state law for ordering another primary.
The heat of this evidence was not hot enough to vacate the entire primary in the manner that they sought.
And with that, the election was basically settled. Ganim won. One of his supporters, Wanda Jeter Pataky, was called to testify about her work. She told a reporter outside the courthouse that the judge's ruling proved she didn't do anything wrong.
I just want to thank the judge for making the right decision. We worked hard. We didn't do nothing wrong. It's just that we worked harder. Me personally, I go door to door. I campaign. I knock on doors. I do everything but besides what people said that I do. I love my freedom, and I wouldn't do nothing to take my freedom away.
The case eventually reached the state Supreme Court, but the outcome didn't change. However, there was one loose end.
So this June 7, 2023 regular telephonic meeting of the Connecticut State Elections Enforcement Commission is called to order.
State election officials were paying attention too. They decided to investigate. But they ran into a major obstacle only a few months later: COVID. And so their investigation dragged on and on and on, so long that a lot of people in Bridgeport might have forgotten the state was even involved. So it's kind of a surprise when, almost 4 years later, a headline in the newspaper announced that some Ganim supporters could face criminal charges for their conduct during the 2019 primary.
The commission authorizes counsel to refer to the Office of the Chief State's Attorney evidence of possible criminal violations as it relates to the election primary or referendum violations discovered in the investigation of matter 2019-123.
Commissioners voted unanimously to refer the case to the state's top prosecutors. They named 3 people who should be considered for potential criminal charges. All of them backed Ganim in the 2019 mayoral race. Nobody really knew about this, though, until the Connecticut Post published a story months later. When the news broke, Ganim said he didn't know anything about the alleged improprieties around absentee ballots. He told CT Public's All Things Considered he thinks there was a political agenda behind the timing. That's because Ganim was preparing to run for re-election just a couple of weeks later.
It's very suspect as to what's going on here about attempts to interfere with an election process, a Democratic primary in the city of Bridgeport.
One of the Ganim supporters named in that election investigation, Wanda Jeter Pataky. And a few weeks later, she was in the news again.
Allegations of absentee ballot fraud in Bridgeport, all after video was leaked showing a woman stuffing envelopes into the ballot drop box. A lot of people have a lot of questions now.
This video surfacing in Bridgeport, allegedly showing city employee and Mayor Joe Ganim supporter Wanda Jeter Pataky stuffing white envelopes into an absentee ballot drop box.
More questions about absentee ballots. It was deja vu. 4 years after the 2019 Democratic primary race wound up in court, Ganim stood for re-election. And once again, he won a close primary, thanks to about 250 absentee ballots. But this time, there was one difference. A mysterious video surfaced online and upended everything. That's the video you heard at the very beginning of the first episode. Democratic challenger John Gomes shared it online. He said the video appeared to show Jeter Pataky stuffing envelopes into a ballot box early one morning outside a municipal building. That's the same woman who said she didn't do anything wrong in 2019. Jeter Pataky works for the city as a receptionist. She also serves as vice chairwoman of the Democratic Town Committee, so she's high up in Bridgeport's party. Here's Gomes' campaign manager, Christine Bartlett-Josie.
Given her position and actions, there are legitimate questions regarding the integrity of the Democratic Town Committee. Moreover, her current alignment to the Ganim administration raises concerns about their knowledge and involvement in these alleged fraudulent activities.
We reached out to Jeter Pataky to ask her about her side of the story. Her lawyer declined our request. For his part, Ganim says he doesn't condone any kind of interference in the city's elections. He also called attention to video recordings from other ballot drop boxes in Bridgeport. He said they show people who support his challenger, Gomes, engaging in serious election irregularities of their own. Gomes denies it. If it were up to him, Ganim says he'd remove the ballot drop boxes altogether.
Let's get the damn boxes out of there.
Here he is talking about this on Connecticut Public's talk show The Wheelhouse in November.
They're the cause of the problem here that led in part to all this, along with other things. I'm not blaming the boxes themselves, but we're not in a position locally, and if we could get rid of them, I'd get rid of them. I was told I don't have the authority to do that.
Now, to be clear, the Democratic Town Committee hasn't been accused in court of coordinating this activity or participating in it. We ran into Bridgeport's so-called kingmaker, Mario Testa, on primary day in September 2023. He was visiting one of the city's schools where people were voting. This was before the video came out. We asked him whether he expected any problems with absentee ballots this time around. He dismissed the notion that anything would go wrong.
We always been above board. We always instruct the people to follow the law. Listen, the losers, they always got something to say, negative. So that's the bottom line.
All of this wound up in court in another civil lawsuit. And Judge William Clark ordered the city to redo the primary. He said there was enough evidence to suggest absentee ballots were mishandled. Jeter Pataky was called to testify during the hearing. She didn't answer some of the questions she was asked on the stand. She invoked her Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate herself. Ganim wasn't personally accused of doing anything wrong in the lawsuit, but he had to testify too. Here he is answering questions from the plaintiff's attorney, Bill Bloss.
And you, as a result of what you've described as a leak on about September 14th, you understood, you believed that showed misuse of the absentee ballot boxes, right?
I didn't know what it showed. I mean, we saw videos here. I wasn't sure 100%. Certainly appeared that way. Certainly was shocked by what appeared in those videos.
Why were you shocked?
Because it appeared to be just as you stated it.
Absentee ballot box misuse.
People approaching the absentee ballot boxes, and it was put out with characterizations that was in fact what it was and who it was.
The story got picked up by national media, and it did the rounds in right-wing circles. Elon Musk even posted about it on Twitter, now X. It's an easy political talking point. But it's important to remember that beyond the headlines, beyond the tweets, there are real people in Bridgeport who feel disenfranchised by the allegations of improper conduct in local elections.
A little disappointed, but not surprised.
I wasn't surprised because the Democratic Party, even though I'm a Democrat, is just corrupt.
The election fraud here that has happened is not unique to this particular election cycle. It's gone on for 20, 30 plus years. It's the culture that's been built here by the Democratic Party.
Well, it's something that I already suspected, especially when Marilyn Moore ran for the mayor last time. And I already found it suspicious that she happened to lose when the absentee ballots were counted.
This is not really a political issue. This is a civil rights issue in which the voices of the people of Bridgeport have been suppressed for decades. Now we finally have proof with the video coverage in which this no longer can be swept under the rug and denied and joked about up in Hartford.
Those were voters Nathania Hernandez, Ann Cote, Kelvin Ayala, Leslie Mooncada, and Jack Hennessy at polls on Election Day in November 2023. All these voters said watching the ballot box video reaffirmed their beliefs about Bridgeport politics, that it's dysfunctional, that political operatives twist the rules, that citizens don't have their voices heard. And those are people who turned up to vote. Like in many cities, turnout is a real problem in Bridgeport. Only about 14,000 people voted in last year's general election. That's out of a city with nearly 150,000 people. Historian Terry Galway says political machines have a kind of corrosive effect on democracy. He says it's natural that people who aren't part of the party boss system would feel disempowered.
That suggests that democracy doesn't matter and the voters are mere vessels who are summoned to vote yes, basically, right?
Chris Caruso is the Democrat who once campaigned against Testa's leadership. He says you don't need to find hard evidence of votes being cast improperly to show there's a problem with the city's political system. He says people in Bridgeport perceive it as corrupt.
There's no question about it. Any form of corruption, perception or reality, always puts a chilling effect on an election, on the governance of the city. Of course it does. And I think it's just become an accepted thing in Bridgeport.
Former Mayor John Fabrizi says the problem isn't corruption. It's a sense that people in power are owed something.
The biggest issue of all, you use the word corruption, I'll use the word entitlement. The longer you stay in office, the longer you feel you're entitled to certain things. Joe Ganim displays that every day today.
For a lot of people outside of Bridgeport, both in Connecticut and nationally, it's easy to dismiss the dysfunction of Bridgeport as kind of a local phenomenon. Like the city is just so backwards or whatever else that its problems don't go beyond its borders. But there's a bigger question lingering here. Where are the systems of accountability in Connecticut? It's not like this was the first election where things went wrong. People have been winking and nodding about absentee ballots and Bridgeport's political machine for decades. After the 2023 primary, Connecticut Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas, said she views the problems in Bridgeport as isolated. Thomas says the current absentee voting process is complex, and most voters don't know exactly how it's supposed to work.
This situation is not about partisan politics. It's not about a broken electoral system. This isn't even about absentee ballot systems. It's about a few bad actors and an undereducated electorate.
Here's Democratic Governor Ned Lamont.
I think if there were particular issues in Bridgeport, we got the right people down there. We'll get to the bottom of it, I hope, soon.
Except the governor wasn't talking about the 2023 election. That was what he said 4 years earlier after allegations surfaced in the 2019 primary. Here he is addressing the latest Bridgeport absentee ballot controversy.
I saw those videos. They were disturbing. That said, don't jump to conclusions. I say that every time. But I really want to thoroughly investigate this. The integrity of our electoral system is so important. I got to make sure that people have confidence.
On the next episode of In Absentia, we look at some of the systems, or lack of systems, in place that could help people regain that confidence in local elections. This episode was reported and produced by me, Kate Seltzer, and by Jim Huddadine. Jim Huddadine is also our investigative editor. Meg Dalton and Cassandra Basler are our editors. The investigative team also includes Bria Lloyd and Ashad Hajilla. Fact-checking by Danya Suleiman. Sound design and mixing by Adrian Lilly. Music in this episode from APM. Additional editing help from Lily Tyson, Erica McIntosh, Robin Doyen-Aitken, Vanessa De La Torre, Lucy Nalpathanchel, Katie Tolarski, and Eric Austin. Archival news reporting by WFSB, WNPR, and Fox 61. Legal review by Hinckley Allen. Vanessa De La Torre is our Chief Content Officer. To learn more about the podcast, visit ctpublic.org/bpt. I'm Kate Seltzer. In Absentia is a production of Connecticut Public.